We continue with this extended interview between licensed professional counselor and founder of SurvivorSupport.net, John K. Uhler, and his very special guest, former priest of 25 years, John Gallagher, who is the first Catholic priest on record to have directly resisted and disobeyed the demands of the Church's hierarchical leadership to allow them to fly a predator priest out of his congregation in the dark of night, which has been the Church's historical practice. Instead, John Gallagher held the perpetrator and the evidence from the perpetrator's hard drive for the police. The police arrested the predator, and he was locked up, something unheard of among the Catholic clergy, and something that the Church's highest levels would ensure would be a regrettable decision for John Gallagher, as they unleashed a multiple-prong attack against him, both personally and professionally, and would even target him for actual retribution and harm. If I may go off script for a moment, I personally want to convey what an honor it is to be able to introduce both our guest, John Gallagher, and our podcast host, John Uhler. As rare is the time you'll find two such men together for such a discussion. Two men who each have lived lives of such integrity that they were ready to do the right thing, the godly thing, when confronted with moral dilemmas in their careers, which meant they would each open themselves up to tremendous personal and professional consequences by very large organizational structures and powers, when others around them would have likely found an excuse to simply turn a blind eye to what they each respectively witnessed, finding plausible justification to not risk getting involved. In John Gallagher's case, as we are hearing from him, he would not just go along with what his employer expected, with what had been the policy and practice of the Roman Catholic Church, of dealing with pedophile priests by allowing church hierarchy to fly the perpetrator out of the country prior to law enforcement being able to make an arrest. Hence, John Gallagher is the first priest on record, having served for 25 years, to have prevented the escape of a pedophile priest. In John Uhler's case, it is not all that well known he was the very first prison psychology staff within the US state prison system to take a bold and risky stand against an entire state prison system, having blown the whistle on the abuse of mental health inmates in long-term solitary confinement, having designed and overseen clinical treatment within the very first intensive treatment program for such men in long-term solitary confinement in the United States, which is also how he ended up logging more clinical contact hours in long-term solitary that any single prison psych staff in the US or Canada spending over 5 straight years in that uniquely intensive environment. John Uhler saw how a change of prison administrations was facilitating an influx of uniquely sadistic corrections officers into that treatment milieu, which caused a very dangerous change of unit dynamics, leading to what one could almost describe as a repeat of the infamous Stanford prison experiment, which generated the book The Lucifer Effect, Understanding How Good People Turn Evil.
One of America's most prestigious academic institutions, and in 1971, the scene of one of the most notorious experiments in the history of psychology.
This particular experiment was planned for 2 weeks, but terminated after just 6 days.
The guards had become dangerously sadistic. The guards were going far beyond keeping the prisoners behind bars, and the prisoners were breaking down emotionally.
I can't say that. I'm f***ed up. I don't know how to explain how f***ed up inside.
With the chief prison psychologist and other key prison administrators refusing to help John rein in the rogue officers, he was left with one of two options: either look the other way and maintain his secure position, or elect to do the right thing, the hard thing, to do whatever he could to stop such abuse even if it meant going outside of the system to a federal advocacy organization, the Disability Rights Network, which would ultimately lead to the United States Department of Justice launching an extended undercover investigation where John and two of his colleagues who agreed to join him in the whistleblowing investigation served as the three key witnesses against the prison administration and their immediate boss, prison chief psychologist James Harrington. As a result, this case, the practice of using long-term solitary confinement on mental health inmates, was brought to a close throughout prisons, both state and federal, within the United States. Thus, it is important to see in John Uhler a man who was willing to do what no previous prison psychology staff member had ever been willing to do, to risk his career, his safety, and his future. By being the first psych staff to stand up to an entire state prison system. And he is forever grateful that his other two prison colleagues were willing to bravely stand alongside him, as it would ultimately take such three strong voices to prove too much truth for the prison system to refute. To read the actual emails, official notes of thanks, and professional feedback John Uhler received during his time while serving with distinction on prison psych staff for over a decade, and about the failed whistleblower retaliatory attempts taken by the Pennsylvania Department of Corrections, including the court order dismissing all fraudulent charges of so-called forgery thrown at John Uhler, and ordering the expungement of his record back to the historically spotless condition. Please visit churchprotect.org under the Insights 2 tab. Then under When Called to Do the Hard Thing for the entire story, with all the documents showing the events leading to 100% of all the false charges being dismissed. The pathetic attempt at retaliating against him doing the right thing all fell flat, and that is also why he was able to retire from the prison system on his terms at the time of his choosing, and with his full pension and retirement benefits still intact. As John Uhler faced the ridiculous and previously unheard of criminal charges of forgery, something which had never been used against any other psych staff before or since, ever in the history of the Pennsylvania Department of Corrections, over what would otherwise have been handled as simply an administrative paperwork issue. But they were determined to find something, anything on him, to spin a false narrative about him in order to bury their retaliatory hatchet in his back. Toward that end, they employed multiple administrative and clerical staff to covertly audit his work for the better part of an entire year after John's immediate boss retired, looking for any mistakes or errors they might find. From them piling on the work. It was a classic setup. What would have ordinarily been a simple corrective administrative issue, especially given his year's worth of exemplary performance reviews by his boss and chief institutional psychologist, Dr. Robert Jaskanich, which would have ordinarily been easily addressed and corrected simply by lowering John's extremely heavy workload. All normal administrative steps were summarily sidestepped and bypassed, given that it was the objective of the administration to strategically increase John's workload toward the goal of burying him under ever-increasing time pressure, so that he would begin to make mistakes, to begin to try to make the case that John was no longer able to keep up with the job's demands. Given who John is, he would not give them what they wanted, his resignation. He would simply try to continue to handle the expanding workload. But it was only a matter of time until he would begin to miss things and make mistakes. And that is when they were able to implement their plans for a behind-the-scenes audit to find any errors. And of course, with that level of intensive scrutiny, they were bound to find something they could use to complete their search and destroy mission. After a year of digging, they finally found what they could use to craft their false narrative about John Uhler. Out of all those months and all those thousands of documents, they found 3 single sheets of paper. Get that? They found a total of 3 single sheets of paper, comprising 3 individual monthly inmate treatment plans. Yep, you heard that right. Out of the hundreds of mental health treatment plans and psych reports and evaluations he had constructed over the 11+ years of his tenure, with an administration that had launched a covert intensive audit involving multiple administrative staff, spending countless hours, spanning a year, combing through thousands of John's clinical documents and reports, and coming up with only 3 errors, on 3 single sheets of paper, on 3 of the hundreds of monthly inmate treatment plans. And they would take those and attempt to spin criminal charges from that, no matter how absurd and transparently retaliatory it was to do so. Upon finding the 3 separate single sheets of paper out of thousands reviewed, they took the brazen and unprecedented step of lodging actual criminal charges. That's right. So hungry for his scalp were they, that they would sidestep all normal corrective HR steps and all historical union practices and processes, and they went directly for the jugular, asserting John Uhler had committed criminal acts of forgery, despite them full well knowing that this was an administratively assigned workload issue and had nothing to do with criminality. But it was their way of teaching him a lesson, of punishing him for daring to blow the whistle on their institutional corruption and to make an example out of him. But their wicked motives and retaliatory scheme was easily seen through by the judge, who rebuked the Pennsylvania Department of Corrections at the beginning of the proceedings for trying to pull off such a malicious stunt, dismissed all charges, and ordered all such spurious charges be expunged from John Uhler's record. Though John Gallagher did not face having false criminal charges filed against him, he would not only face the same kind of malicious slandering of his reputation and the strategic and methodical ramping up of personal and professional harassment, but due to lacking any workplace support or union protection, John would face the full backlash of the church's hierarchy's ire, and knowing they held powerful leverage over any retirement he might receive after 25 years of full-time service, John Gallagher did indeed face a rare degree of retaliatory tactics and strategic punishment for his brave and principled stance, and the hierarchy would indeed set their sights upon him. It was their way of teaching him a lesson, of punishing him for daring to blow the whistle on their institutional corruption, and to make an example out of him. The church's leadership drove him to the emotional breaking point by ever-increasing workload and by damaging his reputation with local congregations by means of slandering him. His health failed, which placed him in a very vulnerable position, because as is the nature of employment as a priest within a local Catholic parish, he lived and slept full-time on church grounds, to where it could be made to look like accidents happen, even after he had been admitted into the emergency room at one of the major nearby hospitals. Such retaliatory tactics employed in such special cases as John's would work as the wicked protectors of predators within church leadership intended. They eventually forced his hand, which meant he would leave the ministry after 25 years, without any retirement package or benefits. Talk about paying a heavy price for protecting children, left to try to start over again. With little to show for 2.5 decades of faithful ministry, to try to figure out what he might do to support himself from scratch, to begin a new career in his 50s, He has done that. He has restarted his life and a career, and is also now beginning to tell his story to set the record straight. With the recent selection of a new pope, John Gallagher, and survivor groups within the church, representing those who've been abused by priests, report reasons to believe that it will more than likely, unfortunately, still be business as usual within the Catholic Church's leadership. As John says, you'll know them by their fruits.
Well, there are new so-called whistleblower documents that accuse Pope Leo XIV of mishandling abuse allegations while he was bishop in Peru.
WGN's Christine Flores joins us now with those accusations and the steps the group releasing them plans to take as they try to hold the new pope accountable.
Well, good afternoon, Ben and Lourdes. The documents were presented by a group known as the Survivors Network of those abused by priests. They claim the pontiff mishandled clergy's sex abuse cases, which were swept under the rug, and say there is mounting evidence supporting the claims.
This is the underground story of Prevost. This is the side of him and his management and his decisions that we're finally being able to bring to light.
Peter Isley is one of the founders of the Survivors Network of those abused by priests, also known as SNAP. The group filed a complaint on March 25th against then Cardinal Prevost with the Vatican Secretary of State, claiming he abused clerical power in the handling of abuse cases.
The reason we filed that complaint, and we filed 6 of them at that time, so it wasn't because of any personal vendetta that we had against Prevost. He held this very important position at the dicastery for bishops, where he was then put in charge of managing, the conduct of all of these bishops around the world. It raised alarms for us, and we believe that what we had seen in their open letter reached, a level of proof that we needed to demand an investigation, and that's what we did.
One case is about a then priest in the Archdiocese of Chicago who was placed on restricted ministry in 1990 due to abuse allegations. According to the group, he was not an Augustinian and was allowed to live at an Augustinian friary from 2000 to 2002, which was around the corner from an Archdiocese elementary. The second Chicago case is about a principal at a Catholic high school with reported history of abusing children between 2006 and 2010.
I think these cases show a pattern of inaction, of covering up abuse, of mishandling cases, of not following church policies, and endangering children.
The complaint goes on to mention 3 women in Peru who came forward to accuse 2 priests during Prevost's tenure as cardinal. The group is now calling on the Pope to establish the following.
We're asking for a law written into canon law that makes it a crime to cover up the rape of a child. It's not asking much. There is no crime, there is no law on the books right now that has a punishment for helping to cover up for child rape.
We have reached out to the Archdiocese of Chicago for comment on these cases and have not heard back yet. The group says they have received lots of pushback from the Vatican and cardinals from around the world who have told them multiple times Pope Leo did everything right and handled the cases properly. Back to you guys in the studio.
All right, we'll take it from you, Christine. Thank you.
Simply put, the test of whether the new pope is a man of integrity, serious about going after sexual predators, or whether it is business as usual, where he simply intends to continue to protect the church's business interests over protecting women and children from predators and predator rings operating within the Catholic Church, proving he is a false shepherd and a hireling, and simply pushing more of the same corrupt church-protecting system. The test comprises 4 very simple and straightforward questions. 1. Will he drag his feet with regard to allowing law enforcement complete access to all of the secret bishop archives containing the names and incidents of predators? 2. Will he continue to drag out making real and full reparations and restitution to all survivors of predator priests, and restitution to those priests who were targeted for dismissal after blowing the whistle on predators within the church? 3. Will he stop resisting legislation intended to lift statutes of limitations on abuse claims for older survivors? And 4. Will he allow the US FBI, the Department of Justice, and Interpol to gain unfettered access to church records and electronics to root out the current pedophile rings operating within the Catholic clergy? In terms of the subsequent steps he took to hold the church's hierarchy accountable for whistleblower retaliation, workplace harassment, and other troubling employment practices, as we will see in the final part of the interview, John would fight back to hold the church's leadership accountable for violating employment practices by taking his case all the way to the US Supreme Court, a precedent-setting case. But lest I jump ahead a bit too much in our story, in terms of where we left off, we will hear about what tactics were brought to bear against John for daring to defy church's orders to let the perpetrator priest be flown out of the country at night before police could arrive to arrest him. Hearing their respective stories regarding the retaliation from having done the right thing, it is understandable why both John Uhler and John Gallagher have taken strength from the truth of Scripture, of God being a God of justice and being their recompense. When they stood up for what is right and bravely stood against those demonically inspired wicked enemies and the evil schemes that were employed against them because of their godliness. One of the verses both John Uhler and John Gallagher point to encourage others about God honoring those who do right, is Psalm 37, verses 30 to 34, which reads as follows: "The godly offer good counsel. They teach right from wrong. They have made God's law their own, so they will never slip from his path. The wicked wait in ambush for the godly, looking for an excuse to kill them. But the Lord will not let the wicked succeed, or let the godly be condemned when they are put on trial. Put your hope in the Lord. Travel steadily along his path. He will honor you by giving you the land. You will see the wicked destroyed." That was from the New Living Translation. You can see why it is such a rare opportunity to hear from such two principled men, and to have them together for an interview. Men who've each paid the price for doing the hard thing. But now, we resume where the interview left off last time, this being part 4 of John Gallagher's interview and personal story. We pick up the interview where John Gallagher begins describing what happened after the predator priest was arrested and what it was like to face such systematic and professional-grade retaliation at the hands of the world's largest and most powerful religious organization on earth. Be sure to like, subscribe, share, and follow to ensure you are notified when additional videos are published.
Welcome back to the Predator Watch podcast. I'm John Uhler, and we have as our special guest John Gallagher. John, thank you for continuing to be with us. We are picking up where we left off, where you left off, and I recommend that people go back and watch the previous episodes. You blew the whistle on child abuse, on child sexual abuse, and what is so profound about what you did, not only did you do the right thing, but there are a number of priests that have also done the right thing over the past number of years, but your willingness to blow the whistle ultimately produced a conviction. So that is what's so compelling about your case, because the Catholic Church, the hierarchy, trashed your reputation. They went after you. You had a sense that was going to be the case, but the way they did this, right, they don't like sunshine, and we are here to help people understand that though we are not anti-Catholic, we're not trashing the Catholic faith, we are after sunshine. People need to be held accountable for the amount of sexual abuse of quite frankly, of women as well, but of children that is going on in the Catholic Church. And good folks like you have stood up and said enough is enough. And so you blew the whistle and you paid a very heavy price for that.
Well, I think you're, very right, John, in the sense we're looking for sunshine. I mean, what does the Lord say? The Lord is our light and our salvation. And if we're not following his light, then we're not getting to salvation. And, who is it you worship? Who is your God? And if you're in that world of, deviant sexual behavior and supporting that, well, that's not the God of the gospel. That's a different God. That's not the God of the gospel. Because the God of the gospel came to set us free, not to put us in bondage. He came to break the bondage of sin, to set captives free. And in the Catholic Church, there are a lot of people across the board, from priests to laymen and women, to moms and dads, to kids, who are trapped trying to figure out where do they go from here. They're conflicted because they really don't want to go against the Catholic Church. But that's not the issue. The issue is they don't want to go against God, but no one has explained that to them. So the institution becomes the God, and they serve the institution and not God.
John, and that's so crucial what you just said, and that's going to help set captives free right there. So that survivors need to understand that if they were perpetrated upon by a priest or someone connected to the church, a Catholic Church, but again, this has to do with any religious organization or any organization across the board, you are not betraying an institution. I'm sorry, you are shining light. You're not betraying God. You're not betraying God by illuminating very dark things. The sickness, the darkness has to be brought to the light.
And that's very biblical, because we're told that, the word of God shines and it will illuminate the darkness. And in our culture today, there is a very strong element of darkness. Vice is now virtue. Virtue is now vice. We have flipped the switch. And so darkness is now seen as the light, and light is now seen as bad. And that has created the spirit of confusion. The book of Revelation talks about the spirit of the age. And we're dealing with the spirit of the age, not the spirit of God. And in this great deception, many families, many people out there at a point in time will have a wake-up call, and it just may be too late. Because then where do you go? If we're taking out the shepherds, regardless if you're the Catholic priest or you're the pastor in some church, there is an attack on you. I mean, there is a bullet on your back. There's that bullet board, and that's, that bullseye. And somebody somewhere is going to shoot something. It doesn't have to be the truth, but will it stick? And if you speak out, then you're wrong. You're not acquiescing to, going modern, getting with the times. And we've heard the conversations in the mainstream media and different commentaries telling us, the gospel is there, yes, but we need to align with modern day thinking. Well, thinking can be erroneous. And erroneous thinking is creating a culture of captives. And history will speak more to the conversation than many of us. Because I think the question coming down the line with history will be, how did they let this happen?
And did you speak up? Right, and John, in your case,
what did you do about it?
There we go. There we go. So, John, let's pick up where we left off. Again, I recommend people go back and watch the past number of episodes. You saw unfold in front of you a priest that had been transferred to your parish, to your congregation, really, and once you found out, you knew why after the fact, because he had been a perpetrator. And the Roman Catholic Church has a long-standing pattern. Instead of having these guys locked up or kicking them out of the church, they just shift them around, these priests. So they are covering for perpetrators. They send them around, and one was sent to your church. And before you know it, he's showing pornography to a child. And you confronted him. You found out from what he was saying that the age of his preference of children, was extremely young. And then he disclosed that he was part of a predator ring. And so you then were faced with the ultimate moral dilemma. Do you go against the church, and you had a sense of what was going to come down on your head if you did? Or do you go to the authorities and pick it up at that point, John?
Yes, and that's the challenge, John, is that, he wasn't, he wasn't terribly savvy in the sense of street smarts. He just had an appetite. And it was uncontrollable. It was like, someone who is a glutton and they just want to overeat and overeat. He didn't know when to stop. He didn't even have the parameters. And we've talked about this previously. Predators, the more they can be very sophisticated and very suave and take their time to execute their moves. He didn't have any of those behaviors. He went straight for the prey. He didn't do his groundwork. And that, I think, was the telltale for me, was that he hadn't any prep work done. In hindsight, I see this now, because the people where he came from, they didn't have a problem. Where here, typically, when someone has a situation that can be delicate, and that's why they would say in the church, we have a situation, a machine goes into operation to do, damage control, creating a narrative, creating a whole new plan. And then there's an exit strategy. There's the quick pullout and the quick replacement. He had none of that. From what he told me this was the way he did life. And this is the way the life of the church where he came from did business. And it was go to confession, get on a plane, and leave.
And I want people to really understand that. So what you're saying is, it was so prevalent. He was from India, a Roman Catholic priest over in India, that he didn't even have to develop skills of being sophisticated to hide this.
Yeah.
And that's why he was so overt. He comes to the U.S., nobody in the hierarchy said, hey, if you're going to do this, be discreet about it. So he's blatant about it. You see it, and then you blow the whistle. But that's what's so crucial as we're talking about the Roman Catholic Church. But again, it has application for any church across the board, as well as any kind of organization. But again, your knowledge comes from the inside inner workings of the Roman Catholic Church. And so that's why we're focusing on this. But so many survivors have been impacted, so many victims who are now survivors. And so to think that in some parts of the world, though these predators are being moved around, in some parts of the world, it's so ubiquitous that they don't even think to create a cover for themselves. They're just so out in the open. And it shows you how many victims are being created, how many children are being harmed.
Well, and I think that's the reason they can get away with it, is, John, is no one is holding them accountable. Even in, antisocial groups or terrorist groups, and a come from a world of terrorism, they had a code of honor amongst themselves of behaviors and things you would do and how certain things were executed, the planning, the action, and the afterwards. They had their own currency, whatever, however you want to think about it, that's the way they operated. And they executed that. He did not have any of those tools in place. And whoever was grooming him in India certainly had no understanding of him coming to America. And I think, as one person one time said to me, John, he was coming to America, it was Disney World. He thought everything was the game. And I think that's the challenge is, people look at this and they went, okay, he's here. And I think the part that sort of stood out different from secular clergy, he was of a religious order. So he would wear the brown habit. So they say, oh, here comes the Holy Father. Here comes the Holy Friar. And that was the deception. It was a mask. It was a game. So people looked at the optic in front of them and made a payment. Oh, he has to be holy. He was anything but holy. But that's where the mask comes down from the people. And then that's where the seduction happens. And he moved very, very quickly. Because his rule book, his code of honor from where he came from was, if it happens, say you're sorry, move on.
And John, I really want people to understand that, because here, I've been fairly familiar with the Catholic Church, though not being raised in that, but having gone to a Jesuit high school senior year. But it really has been, as you and I have been talking, it's been taking me some time, and here I've worked with predators now for 15 years, but it really has been taking some time to sink in just exactly the extent to which we are talking about how within the Catholic Church, and you use the term syndicate, that this has become, and correct me if I'm wrong, really what amounts to the largest child organized means of abusing children the world has ever seen.
It's frankly shocking that the priests and the bishops and the monsignors and the cardinals knew about all this and weren't shocked and sought to cover it up.
Let's get more on this from DW ethics correspondent Martin Gack. Welcome, Martin. We just heard the bishop there saying mistakes were made, but this does not sound like a mistake. If you believe what's in this report, this was a system. This was the system.
Mm-hmm. Talking about the cover-up, what I found among the most sickening details in this is that there was a cover-up, almost a playbook that the church hierarchy followed.
Yeah, the grand jury talks about that. They said it had several steps, including, first of all, you didn't talk about the specifics of what happened, the crimes. Instead, you referred to it as horseplay or wrestling, so you diminished it.
The euphemisms that church officials used for decades to cover it up. You see, church officials routinely and purposefully described the abuse as horseplay and wrestling and inappropriate contact. It was none of those things. It was child sexual abuse, including rape, committed by grown men, priests, against children.
Then when the priests were moved out of the parish, you didn't tell the parishioners why the priest was gone. He just disappeared. And then most of all, they said the rule was don't go to the police. And that enabled this to remain a secret from the parishioners and to enable the church to do what it wanted with those priests.
Just these few examples of those contained in the report demonstrate starkly similar corrupt and unconscionable abuse. The pattern was abuse, deny, and cover up. The effect not only victimized children, it served a legal purpose that church officials manipulated for their advantage. The longer they covered it up, the less chance law enforcement could prosecute these predators because the statute of limitations would run. As a direct consequence of the systematic cover-up by senior church officials, almost every instance of child sexual abuse we found is too old to be prosecuted.
Why, when this first came out, did this not stop? Did the church not take stronger actions? Why are we still talking about this? We now know it's been going on for 70 plus years.
It's criminality. Criminality through and through.
It's alleged Monsignor William Lynn buried complaint after complaint of sexually abusive priests. Philadelphia grand jury investigations unearthed a pattern of cover-up at the highest reaches of the archdiocese.
This is a criminal enterprise, so I wanted to uncover it.
We did find one case where someone took aim at the hierarchy of the church.
You call it a cover-up.
And the church called it unfair.
Yeah.
But that didn't dissuade you.
No, nothing dissuaded me. These guys are no good. These are bad guys.
Lynn Abraham was Philadelphia's scrappy district attorney for 19 years.
I'm a very strong individual, and things bother me. My conscience, people have likened my conscience to a true North Pole star. It just doesn't move. And when things bother me, I have to find out why they bother me.
The sex abuse scandal that's rocked the Catholic Church took a new turn today.
What was bothering Abraham were reports of widespread clergy abuse that were coming out of Boston.
Bernard Cardinal Law has resigned.
It's alleged hundreds of children were sexually abused by priests while Law either looked the other way or shuffled pedophile priests from one unsuspecting church to another.
I said to myself, well, if it happened in Boston, can Philadelphia, with its very large and very strong archdiocese and Catholic population, how could we have been missed?
The church hierarchy in Philadelphia tried to get out in front of any scandal. Revealing its secret archives identified 35 abusive priests in the archdiocese.
I said, look, we're going to do a grand jury investigation of abuse in the church, and we can do it two ways. The best thing for the church to do is say, here are all our secret archives. We only have 35 cases. That's all we have. Here are all of our records. Go through them, and that'll be an end to it. Or you can resist us, and we'll just take it as it goes. So they said, well, we're not going to give it to you.
Some of the dioceses sought to prevent the entire report from ever seeing the light of day. In effect, they wanted to cover up the cover-up. They sought to do the same thing that senior church leaders in the diocese we investigated have done for decades. Bury the sexual abuse by priests upon children and cover it up forever.
One of the things that the grand jury sort of brings forth is that essentially the church, at least in the state of Pennsylvania and within the diocese, particularly Pittsburgh, which is 1/3 of where those people charged are from, was essentially operating as a criminal organization. And this is actually a very damning charge.
You're dealing with an international criminal enterprise.
So that is to say, there was a system for both protecting these people that evidently was perpetuating the problem.
For centuries, and I have clients who were abused 80 years ago. They were sexually abused by priests. The criminal acts were clear. The supervisors allowed it to happen. Those were criminal acts and allowing it to happen. And it's continuing. You have the most prestigious, powerful, influential institution in the world, the Catholic Church, allowing the wholesale sexual abuse of children. Supervisors turn their backs on innocent children. Pedophile priests sexually abused innocent children. And the Vatican knew about it. Cardinals knew about it. Cardinal McCarrick himself is a sexual abuser. Monsignors knew about it. Supervisors knew about it. If the Catholic Church has a problem with money, they'll call the police to determine who's stealing money from the church. But if they have a problem with sexual abuse of children, they keep it quiet. And that's how it's been kept, quiet. Secrecy is the common thread here.
In response to the attention, members of the church hierarchy have argued that media coverage has been unfair, excessive, and disproportionate. After the 2002 revelation by the Boston Globe that cases of abuse were widespread in the church in Massachusetts and elsewhere, the Dallas Morning News did a year-long investigation. It reported in 2004 that even after these revelations and public outcry, the institutional church had moved allegedly abusive priests out of the countries where they had been accused, but assigned them again to settings that bring them into contact with children, despite church claims to the contrary. Among the investigation's findings was that nearly half of 200 cases involved clergy who tried to elude law enforcement.
And based on my experience and what I've gone through, and having spoken with other victims, spoken with other whistleblower priests, this, if you're in the group, this is mainstream. If you're outside the group, you're the one with the problem. And I think that's the delusional part. I remember when the Dallas Charter came around and they all walked away saying that that was great and they were going to implement that. But it didn't happen. I think the governor of Oklahoma was the one to chair that board. And in one of the interviews he gave, he couldn't understand why they weren't enforcing it. He later resigned. And I think one of the things that came to mind for me was as I listened to the interview again most recently, was a number of years ago. I was in the Vatican and I was in one of the dicastery office. And it may have been the office of the New Evangelization. And I was quoting a letter that the late Pope John Paul had written. And the priest there gave me this blank stare. They say, "What are you talking about?" I said, "Well, Pope John Paul wrote this letter, and this is how he would have answered that question." And he just said, "Well, John, we write those documents, we don't read them." And when I heard the then Bishop Wilton Gregory, now Cardinal Archbishop of Washington, say this, we've created this. And then the governor of Oklahoma, I forget the man's name offhand, he was questioning, you've created this document, why are you not implementing it? All I could think of was, in Rome, the attitude is, we have written this, we didn't read it. So it's not that important.
It's just for PR and damage control.
It's a damage control. It's a public relations, change the narrative. And anyone can say, let's use the Dallas Charter. Well, the Dallas Charter is ineffective. It protected the bishops, not the priest.
And I was in Pennsylvania when the Pennsylvania scandal broke.
Yeah.
And it became clear to me as I was watching, there was a large news conference with the Attorney General. You had victims on the stage, they're seated. And after that, there was convened this meeting, and I think there was an archbishop or somebody was being flown over to Pennsylvania. There was a large meeting that was going to be held of church leaders. And the victims felt like, and this is where I could see, it was such classic predatorial damage control, cult-like moves, right? That you feign sincerity, you feign feigned empathy. They have no empathy, right? They have no conscience and therefore no empathy and no remorse. But if you look at someone, you're playing upon their sympathies, and you're mirroring what they want to see. So you have impression management. That's a characteristic of white-collar psychopath, that you're showing someone the kind of emotions, though they're not sincere, they're not rooted or grounded in anything, but you're showing them, you're feeding them back what they want to hear. So they think you're being honest. And in the Catholic Church, of all places, they would think that they would get sympathy and empathy. It would be from religious leaders. So these religious leaders in the Catholic Church convene a meeting, and the victims were there. They were given a chance to say their piece, meaning what happened to them. And they walked away, and I started to see this. There were meetings after meetings, and then nothing was done. You get these, adding insult to injury. So you get these victims, you get their hopes up, and then nothing happened. And then it got so bad that a number of them were flown out to the Vatican. I remember this. And so they kept saying after these meetings, these victims, these survivors, they were interviewed by news outlets. And it's, I think this is a new day. It's a day of change. I think they really heard us. We felt listened to. We felt cared for. And then time would go by. And they realized time and time again, I watched it unfold over the months. They realized they were being fed a line. They're just being, somebody's blowing smoke. And then eventually the latter state is worse than the former.
Well, and that was one of the questions I had with a number of those who went to Rome that I spoke with after the event, because this was sort of really in the height of my story. And I was watching it, very, very diligently. And, they were getting all the promises of the day. And I would say, so what were the deliverables? What can you take? What can you cash at the bank? This is money. What can you do? And they went, we don't have anything. I said, well, then you walked away with nothing. And the head of that, one of the cardinals who ran that, actually reinstated the predator priest that I had arrested. So the thing was for optics. And I remember one of the national correspondents for Rome at that time, for a major network here in the United States. And she and I were in depth discussions about my story. And her challenge was, but the Pope said the following. And I would say to her, yes, but what can we measure? And I said it in 101 different ways. She couldn't answer it, but she kept giving me the party line. And I just said to her, I said, unfortunately, you have been seduced. And I think that's the challenge most people face and don't want to look at as in what is real, and look at reality for what it is. The media were seduced. And they did what the Vatican asked them to do. Paint a beautiful picture. Everything is beautiful. But it's not. I mean, and when people think, you say, oh, John, you can't be right about this. And you and I had this conversation when we first met. You lived in Pennsylvania at the time. And when I said to you about a certain facility in Pennsylvania, you knew it because you drove past it. You did not know what it meant. And your specialty is sexual predatory. Unmasking that. And here you were driving past that pretty frequently.
Right.
And you did not know this.
And you're referencing a facility that supposedly is for rehabilitation, but meanwhile, it's really indoctrination or further compounding or perpetrating within the organization.
I mean, and that featured heavily in the Pennsylvania report.
As a matter of fact, John, tell us the name of the facility.
It is St. John Vianney in Pennsylvania.
And the supposed purpose of that is what?
Well, what I was told, because I said I would never go near there, and that became another battle within a battle. It's always seen as a house of affirmation. So I used to ask, well, what are you affirming? And it really is, it's a house where predators get together. You're either on your way to jail or you're on your way out of jail. And it's really an indoctrination. And so people will understand the priest may go there. He may be the patient, but he's not the client. The bishop or the superior of the religious order, they are the client. They're signing the check. The priest is the patient. He has no rights. You sign away all your rights, all your HIPAA, everything. It goes on your record. And then what happens is then when you get out of there, they use that against you. In my case, I am not a predator. I put predators in jail. I get them arrested. So for me going there, it was endangerment.
So they have a site, actually a couple of sites, I've learned from you, that if they have a problem, then they send these priests to these locations to help solve the problem.
And the mask is sort of that smoke screen. It's almost like a hologram. Is that, oh, we're doing something about it. We have a place. The London Independent wrote an article a number of years ago, and they named one of the facilities that was in Wales at the time. Stride, it's now since closed. And they called it a boot camp for gays. And they came out with that glazed look. And anyone that has gone there and has gone through all of their treatments and procedures, they have that look. There's a trauma look. And if anyone has ever had PTSD or any form of trauma, it leaves a scar. It leaves a mark. And they would have that. Because you sign everything away, it becomes a bondage. And these facilities operate in plain sight.
And since we're talking about these facilities, so a predator priest, word gets out that a priest has been busted. And so the Catholic Church will go into damage control mode, get the guy out in the middle of the night. As a matter of fact, that's what's so unusual about your case, as we will pick up here in a moment what happened, because you didn't follow the norm. Right? The norm was you put the guy on a plane in the middle of the night before the police can be called. You called the police and the guy didn't get away, and that's what was so amazing. But what you're saying is the Catholic Church has facilities for quote unquote problematic priests. They're to give the impression to the public that they're going to give this guy therapy. They're going to figure out what's wrong with him. So, and then as you're saying, they're worldwide. These are regional. And so the priest is sent to their location. And what takes place in there?
There's a lot of things that happen there that I've been informed on. From what I understand, and I got it qualified and verified by the sexual abuse department in the sheriff's office. You go there and you're there for 2 weeks evaluation. You're in the hospital, you become heavily medicated, and you probably know more about this as a therapist. They then attack things to your brain, to your genitalia, and they start playing porn, sexual images nonstop, to see which one stimulates you. And then you don't get out of that facility till the superior gets the diagnosis that he needs. And then you sign off as a predator. You have these inclinations. So now he has his currency, he can do whatever he wants with you. That's in my journey is where I stopped. Going, I could take no more. When I talked to a church lawyer, he went, yeah, that's okay. And that's where I realized, no, it's not okay. And a lot of these facilities have similar, and then you go back in and you get released or whatever for a period of time, and then you go back and you're there for the duration at the pleasure of. So it's a form of a jail, a penitentiary, and you become a victim of circumstances. So when you come out, you have a record. You've been to a house of affirmation. It's almost like saying, I just got out of jail. You have a record. In the church, you have a record. And then what they do then is typically place you as a priest in residence. And that's the official title, priest in residence, with just the obligation, say mass, confessions, and whatever else. And you serve at the pleasure of the pastor there, but you're watched. At that stage, he has then put in place a whole machine of parishioners, office staff to watch you. And usually come with the label of, oh, he's on a special assignment from the bishop. He's either very bright or he's very, very holy. He's doing something special for the bishop. He's just living here, helping us out. And people buy that. But in reality, John, it's a warehouse. The priest is being warehoused. And that's a term they use within the church. We'll warehouse this priest in this place.
And therefore, now you have this weird dance because the priest has inside information on the organization, but the organization has the goods on this priest.
Yes.
Unbelievable. John, let's pick up now where we left off last time. So you discover this priest who is being warehoused, but he's sent to you. He's being more than warehoused. They sent him out of India, but he's a full-blown predator. I mean, this guy is just a loose cannon. He's not even sly about it. And you see this and you confront him. And because he's so used to being open about what he does, he actually tells you. He tells you that he watches pornography, his age, child pornography, his age of preference, virtually infants. and he's watching infants being raped, because by the time perpetrators are harming children that age, they're doing heinous things. All of it's heinous. But having worked with predators and, for 15 years now, having also worked with them in the prison system, you see, I had access to the police records. So this guy was the worst of the worst. So you then are hit with the shock of, you've got this guy on your hands, this predator on your hands, literally within the same building. You now have to make a decision, because the norm is, as he says, basically, I say I'm sorry, and then you get me a plane ticket, and I'll be out of here, and everything will be okay. That's how we do it. You said, no, that's not how we do it. So pick up at that point.
Well, at that point, John, it was really, it was really high tension, and it was high drama, because he was exasperated trying to explain himself away to me. And he couldn't understand why I had a problem. That's his difficulty. And he had no capacity to understand the danger he had created and the magnitude of what he had done. He had no comprehension for that. And that would be further supported because down the line, he would keep calling me. He couldn't understand why there was a problem. And it's this situation of his MO was to start to cry, say I'm sorry, start to please me, and I'll do this, and I'll never do all of that again, and start to bargain with me.
Which is classic of these predators, right? That's how they gain people's sympathies.
That's how they do it. And fortunately, I had the perception that, people say, well, John doesn't do tears. And it was always a case of not that I didn't do tears, it was, I don't do crocodile tears. And these were crocodile tears. They were false tears. He was telling me a lie. I knew it was a lie. And a lie is a lie. And he just did not have the mental capacity or the comprehension to realize the magnitude of his behaviors, because no one had ever held him accountable. And it's in the sort of in secular terms, it's like, the parent who always gives the kid the prize. Okay, you didn't pass, you didn't do it, but here's the prize. Everybody gets a prize for participation.
There's the participation award, yeah.
And you get all of that. So then somewhere they go, as an adult, and they go into a job and they don't get the prize for participation. They get challenged because you're not performing. And then they get all upset because no one has ever told them you were not successful. I remember one time a parishioner telling me that she was an older lady. She said to me that her dad always said to her, "You're my blonde princess." So she grew up with that until the day she went to elementary school. There was a number of blonde little princesses in there. And she said she didn't understand that there was others. And I think it's a bit like that with us. We don't realize that there's other people out there. And we're just not the only one. And I think that's the challenge. People assume that every priest is holy, every priest is virtuous. They're not.
And this guy had so seared his conscience. And that's what happens, right? It's a progression. Romans chapter 1 talks about a reprobate mind. Once you are given over, if you take the brakes off your conscience and ego starts to snowball, and then whatever somebody gets into starts to become more and more profound. Layer that then with sexual deviance, and eventually you will have no conscience and you fear no consequences. And so for the first time, this guy was being held accountable. He's looking at you like, what are you talking about? No, I'm supposed to say I'm sorry, and then you put me on a plane and I go back to India.
I have seen that even with people who have committed crimes, and they get arrested or they're, in detention. And you probably have seen this also. And they don't understand why they're there, because nobody ever told them it was wrong. And then, they come to the realization, my parents did me a disfavor. For this man in the church did him a disfavor. He shouldn't have gone through the system. He shouldn't have been ordained. But they did the guy a disfavor. They didn't help him. And in that omission of doing the right thing, they knew that. So knowingly, we call that the sin of commission. They already knew this. They endangered. And how many did they endanger before he ever got to me that I don't know about, or you don't know about, that no one knows about, that they have in some secret file? Because the church keeps secret files on these guys. So this is organized. This is just not something that happened. We're thinking on the hoof. They have a plan. And he's like that. And he's like that.
John, that's important for people to know when we're specifically talking about the Roman Catholic Church. And again, it's going to be true for any organization, but within the Roman Catholic Church, sexual deviance is rife throughout the entire organization. Pedophilia is going on all the time. And so the Catholic Church itself has a method of dealing with this so that the church is protected.
And to pick up, John, on just your last phrase, all efforts and all activity is based on protecting the church. That's what you do. You protect the church. And I remember a day or two after the event all happened, I had a senior priest come to me and made an appointment to see me. And I thought he was coming to encourage me and congratulate me. And his words were, I don't know all that went down, but I have a question. I said, what's the question? He said, did you protect the church?
Unbelievable. Right? I mean, people need to really understand that. Because I looked at how many victims. I mean, I've been doing additional research, thousands upon thousands upon thousands of victims that have been hurt, that have been perped on. There are thousands of survivors out there, and to think that within the Roman Catholic Church, their care and concern, the hierarchy, not for the survivors, and that's why those that were revealed in the Pennsylvania situation, the abuse situation, to think that the Roman Catholic Church pays high-priced attorneys to get the church out of hot water. There's never been any serious attempt at helping victims get therapy. It's always, how can we make this problem go away? That is absolutely abhorrent. But as you're revealing, you're someone within the hierarchy comes to you, remind me of his position. So he comes to you and basically says, you blew it. You didn't protect the church.
And I looked at him and I said, my job is to protect the people. My job is to serve the gospel. And I just looked at him and I said, and do you remember, in a completely unrelated incident, you asked me to destroy evidence. And I went, oh.
And what position did he hold within the Catholic Church?
He was one. He would be. He was one of the college of the priest college, and basically in secular terms, one of the senior management in the church, and he was quite confused that I would come back and say to him to destroy evidence. I said, "You've told me that," and he left. And I don't think, he realized, or the people with him realized that, all the things they have said, because for them, saying either destroy evidence or protect the church, that runs off their tongue freely, easily, and with availability. So if you stop to question them, they don't know where the question is coming from because they don't have an answer for it. Because typically everyone will say, oh, okay, fine, Father, okay, Bishop, whatever, I'll do that. I'll take care of it. Don't worry about it. And you're gone. But the question is...
I'll tell you what just came to mind, organized crime.
It is an organized crime. But it's, you know, I mean, in the Bible, it talks about our prayer goes before you like incense. And people say they'll come to the church and they say, oh, you Catholics burn incense. Well, incense came around in the Middle Ages or whatever because it was always to mask the smell of people's bad odor. You know, it was a very physical thing. Now the incense is another metaphor. It's to create the smoke screen. You will see what I tell you to see. And there goes the new narrative. There goes the damage control. Here goes, you know, their code of operation. And this is their code of practices.
And John, I want people to understand this, that what you're saying as a 25-year insider, right? It's not that you don't know what you're talking about. It's not that this is an investigative reporter kind of situation asking what goes on in there. You were on the inside, and what you're saying is the Roman Catholic Church is structured in such a way that its primary focus is to cover up and cover itself. It's not to look out for the sheep. And so those that have been harmed, those that have been raped, kids that have been raped, it's not to help the survivors of this. It is to ensure that this organization incurs as little damage as is possible.
You know, we have a situation within the church, John, and we have seen that here play out in the national news here in the States, where we have bishops who have openly covered up sexual abuse. And then they're going to investigate a brother bishop for improper procedures and reporting abuse or whatever else. But, you know, in layman's terms, we have the fox protecting the henhouse.
Okay.
And that's
I'm sorry, in your case then, as you've been describing it, but even more as I've been doing more research on how prevalent this is. I knew it was prevalent, but this is it's just taken to a whole new level, right? Talking to somebody that was on the inside, that how much more then when you went to the police, when you made that decision to do the right thing and blow the whistle, then this entire organization that is hell-bent, we use that term, it's hell-bent in protecting itself. It's a money-making operation. You had mentioned that previously, that one of the functions of a priest is to bring in offerings. It's almost like multi-level marketing. Or, you know, you're on salary, so that's the focus, bringing in money and then covering up things. This is a corrupt organization. But to think that if you were going to blow the whistle and get the police involved, then they're not going to look to see what they can do on behalf of the victim, but all the guns are going to be trained on you, and they're going to make an example out of you. They're going to punish the man that has the temerity to blow the whistle on sexual abuse.
And that's the way they do business. You know, that's what they do. And, you know, when I spoke to law enforcement and different groups of law enforcement, they told me the same story. You were different. You were different. Your case was different. And from what I understand from my legal counsel and the many lawyers that I spoke with over the years, they told me that, because I had 2 letters of commendation from the sheriff's office, so that's unheard of. That the sheriff, you know, felt so compelled to support me, not only just to come and arrest the guy, but to commend something in paper. And he wrote a letter that to one of the head men in the Vatican regards sexual abuse, and who's supposed to investigate this. He never got a reply. You know, and I remember a book that I read a way back years ago, and I read it on retreat, and it was Priests for a New Millennium by Cardinal Dolan. In chapter 7, he talks about, you know, if someone writes you a letter, send a thank you. And I find this, okay, this is really a very good best practice. Well, I remember writing to him. He never replied. And sometime later, I met with him on a couple of occasions at different events. And I said to him, I had read your book, and he was feeling good because I was stroking his ego. I said, but the only challenge I have, I don't know if the book is true. And he says, what do you mean? I said, chapter 7, you said, if you receive a letter or a card or a gift, red letter of thank you, acknowledge it. I said, yeah, that's true. I said, I've written to you several, and I've never got a reply. And I had this blank stare of, what? And the guy with me said, only John Gallagher would have read the book. And I think that's the challenge, is that, we have from the teeth out, but it's not in our action. The church does not have best practices. I can't even say we've got best intentions. We have the best of aloof thoughts. We may think about it, but there's nothing in action. And that's just, one characteristic of one man who stood out there saying, this is what I'm doing. But that's just a cameo of the other things. I know in my own case, I wrote to Rome. We petitioned Rome and several times in the canonical process. Church law says within 90 days you'll have a reply. It's now 8 years. I still did not get a reply. So they don't follow their own prescription.
And you wrote to them with respect to what?
In my case, we filed a canonical case in Rome, my canon lawyer and myself. And Rome never replied. And anytime.
John, because your case, in essence, if I understand it correctly, once you blew the whistle, the organization came down on you, and now you have an employment situation where, because your full-time career, your full-time job, your career was being a priest. And when the hierarchy suddenly turns its sights on you, the implications are they can remove you. They can kick you out of the organization. You're unemployed.
They ceased me from active ministry the minute I said I would now go to one of their houses of affirmation. And so really, John, the culture in the church is we will ignore anything that comes in that doesn't agree with our narrative. And we have seen that play out with victims. We can write the document, we can publish the book, but we don't have to put it into action. And I think the best reflection of that is, how they live by the Bible principles.
So John, you blew the whistle. And for the listeners, describe what happened, because you were contacted by church hierarchy once they found out that the police had been involved, or just prior to that even as well.
Yes, well, on the morning of after the night before, we're sort of in that moment of shock, what just went down. And when I communicated with the chancellor of the diocese and spoke with her by phone about the situation, and she said, well, this is our policy. We find this works best. Get them on a plane, send them back home, and let them take care of it. And I went, okay. I mean, it was not what I expected, because it's not what we had discussed in any of our Protecting God's Children. And then I said, well, that's too late. He's going to be arrested. The sheriff knows. The state attorney knows. And then there was, oh, we have a problem. And she hung up. Now, I wasn't too sure what the problem was, but in time I would realize I was the problem, not the perpetrator. And I don't understand, all the lobbyists and all the legal professionals who will condone and support a false narrative to enable crime to be committed. Because that's what these attorneys are doing that represent the church. It's no different to an attorney who knows that their client is guilty, but will create a narrative to say that he's not. It's no different.
So the church hires attorneys to paint a false narrative.
And that's what they're doing. And the narrative is not the truth, not the facts. It's an attack on the person. In my case, the attack was on me. And what you find is, not just on my story, but in others who have done similar, is that because the narrative is so authentic, it is so powerful, it comes with full force. Your local parishioner who's going to church, well, there must have been a problem with them. So they start looking at me and not the episode that happened, or not looking at the facts, because now the facts are now hid in a smoke screen, and no one really knows what the truth is then, because there's such a multi-level narrative that happens that the truth becomes obscure.
So it's really a machine that goes into action to protect itself, to do damage control. They're not concerned about the survivor. They're not concerned about truth coming out. They go into damage control mode like any secular organization, but really like organized crime. And in your case, the one thing that was so unique is law enforcement got involved. And in my mind, what's so telling, John, is it doesn't matter what they say, you got a conviction. Law enforcement got a conviction, the DA did. But so that's the elephant in the middle of the room in this case, because you were fine, right? In their eyes, you were fine until this issue happened. And then they slandered you. They created all sorts of false impressions about you, said you were a problem person. But isn't that interesting? Everything was fine until you blew the whistle that produced actual criminal charges and a conviction of the perpetrator.
And John, to add to all of the above, it was caught on camera. And typically that doesn't happen. It was caught on camera. And that sort of becomes a herd of elephants in the room. Because not only did he go to jail, he admitted the crime and he was deported. But it was caught on camera.
And he sure didn't do much time. It's unbelievable.
He got a sweetheart deal.
Somebody paid for his attorney. That would be the church.
Someone paid the bill. One of the questions I have unanswered is he came with no money and his bail was at $10,000. Within a week, $10,000 had been raised and it was paid and he was released. Somebody paid that because he didn't know anyone in the United States.
So bail was met, $10,000 on a child perp who later pleaded guilty.
Yeah, and others who've been done less have got more time. So it wasn't fair. Whatever fair is in this game or this conversation, but he got a sweetheart deal.
So John, they turned their sights on you. This organization, this organized means of cover-up.
Yeah. Well, it became almost like the slow drip, the Chinese torture. They would start initially by, creating an innuendo. Oh, we don't know if John's fit. We don't know if he's got the mental capacity. And then it started to accelerate, oh, we're just coming down to see how you're doing. They weren't there to see.
And meanwhile, they're creating a workload for you that was unsustainable.
Well, that was the part that I don't understand, and they had no moral compass to the fact that this was wrong.
Care.
So
they don't care.
They don't care. They don't have that. The Bible talks about the servant's heart. They didn't have that servant's heart or that shepherd's heart. They didn't have that. They seen nothing wrong with just completely top-loading everything. And if it wasn't done, that was the infraction, not all that was being done. Secondly, they would bus in people from other churches to create pickets, to be basically antisocial behavior and vigilantes. And they thought that was okay. And the narrative was, John doesn't like foreigners. And I went, but I'm a foreigner. I just don't like predators. And that was a tension, and most people typically do not live with a vigilante outside their door.
So you blow the whistle on sexual abuse. And so the narrative that starts to become created, or that is created by the hierarchy, is you're picking on a foreigner, you're xenophobic, I think that's the term. Meanwhile, you're from Ireland and you don't like foreigners.
Well, that was the oxymoron in the conversation. You know what I mean? It was just, this is just not flying. And people didn't have the eyes to see. And all I could hear from church authority, you don't think like the rest of us. And I used to say, well, I don't know what you're thinking, but this is not correct. And I think, one of the things that people need to realize is this guy, or anyone like him, did not arrive on this day, I will molest a kid, or I will show pornography, or I will do X, Y, or Z. They are trained early on. They are formed. They are groomed. They are protected. And this, it's increments. We've talked about this in the past. It's increments. And in his case, not only was he groomed and he was formed, he was trained, but for him, pornography was mainstream. It was okay. And we both know that, you can start going further and further into porn, but at some point in time, a predator, it has to become real. They have to get the control. They have to become the dominant, because in their world, it's the only place that they are dominant. They're not dominant typically in the workplace or with their friends and culture, whatever, even maybe in their marriage. They're not the dominant one. They're the subservient one. So they need to be able to exercise their power. And when that's taken away from them, and they don't get that, they revert to this world of fantasy. And when fantasy becomes real, we have a problem.
Yeah, and then the church goes into damage control mode. So rife within the Catholic Church are predator priests. They move them around. They're going to make sure the church will, the administration will, the hierarchy will make sure that no light is shined, no accountability is had.
In a parallel story, I remember years ago when I was in Ireland, and a guy had got out of jail and he had committed some crimes. And I remember asking him, how did you end up there? And I thought I would get a very long, detailed answer. And his response was, no one told me it was wrong.
Or no one ever held him accountable. Right?
And I went, nobody held me accountable for my actions. I always got the permission. And predators get permission, whether it be from a superior, a group, whatever, somebody somewhere whom they respect, whom they hold in high esteem, gives them permission. So what they do to get that permission, they build their tribe, they build their team of like-minded individuals who will support them, sustain them, and excite them, and get them animated, and get them all mobilized. So now they're strength in numbers. They can go out and get their prey because somebody has given them permission.
Okay, so you blow the whistle. The sights of the Catholic Church, now the target is painted on your back because you transgressed the number one rule, which was you went outside the organization. Law enforcement gets involved. There's an actual conviction. He pleads guilty, the perp does. And now they're going to teach you, they're going to make an example out of you.
Yes.
And they want to send you to one of those special houses of reform. You say, no, thanks. I know what happens in there. So what happened next?
So at that point, John, it was tumultuous because I had exited the Catholic Church in a cardiac ambulance. I was in the hospital and I had treatment and all sorts of procedures. And when I came out of the hospital, rather than getting asked, was I okay? Am I recovering? It was
because of the stress was mounting on you, and you had a physical issue happen because of the stress level.
Everything, I mean, basically the whole health imploded. And this was getting to the point of completely top heavy. I was completely isolated. Nobody wanted to be in my company or talk to me or be friends with me. And I knew my health was very, very bad at that point. And, there's an expression, one doctor one time said, you can fight the body, but the body will always win. And in my case, the body did win because I knew something was happening. And what I did was, in preparation, I got my affairs in order. And one of the things I did was I created a list of, if anything ever happens to me, contact these people and in order of 1, 2, 3. And that was a very lonely spot. I've heard about and I've known people who have written their suicide letters, been stopped. It almost felt like that lonely space.
And when you said, if something happens to me, so you had a sense that the church would even stoop to seeing to your demise and make it look like either suicide or if you just died on the spot.
I didn't sense that they were going to do something. I knew something was happening. I didn't know what. I knew something was in effect. There was a plan in motion, and I knew we were heading crisis point. And it was, the car is going out of control. The brakes aren't working, and I don't know how to stop this. And I'm looking at a cliff.
So you were looking at the potential in your mind that whatever the church felt it needed to do to take you out, that was a potential option that you were facing, meaning that would come against you.
Well, I came from the world of terrorism. That's what you do with someone who doesn't do groupthink. You take them out. And I had no other evidence to say that they wouldn't do that. But I wouldn't be.
John, as an aside, how anybody can be a part of this organization anymore and support this organization. I know people that attend the Catholic Church, and if they really thought about this, that means their tithes and offerings are going to support a very corrupt organization, which is a haven for predators, which pays off people hush money. It's filled with deviant priests, and they hire high-priced attorneys, and then they go after, even at the point of taking them out, literally or figuratively, those that blow the whistle. This is such a corrupt organization.
And I don't think anybody appreciates the magnitude or wants to understand that. And I knew it was big, and I knew what was coming down on me was going to be a massive explosion. It would be my 9/11. It would be my Bloody Sunday. And I remember giving to a person that I trusted and that I knew my contact information, where everything was. And I had this sort of blank stare. Well, what do you mean? I said, don't open this envelope. Don't do anything with it. In the event that anything happens to me, in there is all the information you will need. And they went, okay. And that's what I did. I mean, I didn't know what else to do. I didn't know what else I could do, but I couldn't stop this train. This was coming. This was a ticking time bomb. And I knew it was going to explode. And I've been in so many bomb scares and times where places have been blown up. I have seen that. I've seen the effects of the shrapnel afterwards. So I knew it wasn't going to be good. And the aftermath was horrendous.
And it reminds me of what people have faced, what I've heard, read of accounts. You cross the Clintons, right? The worst place to be is a friend of Bill's, right? Look at the body counts of those that have followed the Clintons. And so people write letters like that, right? That if anything happens to me, I didn't commit suicide. Those that blow the whistle on Hollywood, those, right? So you were in essence saying, I'm not suicidal, but if something happens to me, here's what happened.
And I always call that an epiphany moment. And, at that point in time, I had a very small crew that I would have trusted. And that was very limited. I always said I could do it in one hand and have fingers left over, in regards to the people that knew anything of where to find stuff. And all my own personal documents, my personal information, I had kept in a storage unit, not in the church. I knew better. I mean, I had already had secret cameras in the church in my quarters because I didn't trust anybody when I would not be there. So that's attention upon attention. And, it's, in fact, if you cross anyone, who has a character of questionable behaviors, it's not outside your realm of thinking to realize that they would go after and do something. And I never really give it a lot of thought. I just knew I'd have a plan in place. But when I would have local sheriffs or local police officers in the street stop me, oh, you were that priest. Guess what? No, what? Watch your back. And I went, okay. And they didn't know me. But if you sort of know, street gang, street violence, they have a code of honor and they can tell you what's coming next. And the ingredients were there.
Gentlemen, we're up against the clock for this episode, for this part. Let's continue the next part.
Okay.
That was not the first person that told you to watch your back.
No.
And that reminds me of what you said about somebody connected to the Pennsylvania case. So stay right there. We will pick up on the beginning of the next episode. Thank you so much for your willingness, John, to put it all on the line on behalf of sexual abuse survivors.
Be sure to join us for the fifth and final part of this compelling interview, as John Gallagher will go into detail how the machine of the Roman Catholic Church was put into motion against him by the Church's hierarchy. For John's decision to defy the demands coming down from Rome, to cover up the abuse and criminal actions of a dangerous pedophile priest who was a part of an active, heinous and sadistic pedophile ring within the Catholic clergy, and defying the Church's demands to cooperate in helping the Church's normal process and tactics of hurriedly arranging to fly the predator out of the country to evade arrest and to help avoid any word of the crimes becoming public. John will describe how the Church has a number of well-honed, time-tested methods of dealing with those who might step out of line, thus risking creating PR challenges for the Church, and also raising the spectre of having to pay out money for damages, something the Church views as the highest of problems. Not the crimes against the victims, but that it has to deal with negative press and has to pay out money to survivors, although inevitably done so under the conditions of non-disclosure agreements to keep things quiet for the Church. John not only violated that cardinal rule and practice, but he went so far as to have the perpetrator arrested, something unheard of. Thus, he would be dealt with in very definitive ways to ensure he would pay for daring to take such ethical actions. In the next episode, John describes the multiple stages of the Church's plan that were employed against him, to teach him a lesson and to ultimately remove him from the priesthood, leaving him unemployed, uninsured, without any pension, and homeless. He will also describe the credible threats to his own safety. What was that kind of pressure like? What impact would that have on him and his future? He describes that and more coming up on part 5 of this interview with whistleblower and former priest John Gallagher.
You've been listening to Predator Watch, dedicated to shining the light of truth about the nature of the most sophisticated of sexual predators most likely to target places where victims are most easily accessed. For John Uhler and the entire team, thanks for listening.
Predator Watch has been sponsored by SurvivorSupport.net. As a non-profit organization, Survivor Support is dependent upon the generosity of people who believe in its mission of supporting survivors. Please consider becoming a monthly supporter of this important work.